So once you get into Autodesk Maya, you'll probably, maybe if you haven't used a 3D program, be a little overwhelmed with the interface. So this video, we're just going to talk about what all these basic buttons mean, easiest way to use it. So with Autodesk Maya, if you have a trackpad, you really don't want to use that. You want a mouse. There's functionality that you can really only get with the mouse unless you use a whole bunch of shortcut keys. So if you don't have a mouse and you want to do 3D modeling, please get a mouse. So let's just talk about these views. Right now we're in a perspective, and that means that this will have depth of field. You'll be able to see it in perspective. Now, if I hit this button, I can change my view, and I see also another view that says my top, my front, and my left. Unless you were doing this with a VR headset, you really can't see the space in 3D, so they kind of need to pretend. They need to make these windows. And part of the tricky thing about this perspective, and I'll show you now, is that if I were to make two objects, and even if they were the same size, but this one was closer to me, it would look bigger. So this one shows depth of field, the perspective does, but these don't. They're actually called orthographic. And so if you were to go to panels, you could see I can pick perspective, but I can also pick orthographic, and that means that it won't allow me to rotate around and look at it in different views, but it also won't show me depth of field. I'll see every object in kind of its real size. So that's really the helpful thing about knowing why you have multiple views. Now you can create an object by going to this poly modeling. There's also curves, and they look very similar, but these are made in a completely different way. These are made with something called NURBS, and I'll get into those later, but it's made more by having 2 points and choosing the slope, whereas these poly modeling are drawn more by like putting points on a graph. We start with this. We start with this poly modeling. Now, if I click it, something will just appear on my window, and I don't like that. I like being able to adjust the size. So I start every project by going to Create, Poly Primitives, and then clicking Interactive Creation. And what this does, so I can show you what it looked like without interactive creation, is if I click, it just appears. And then I have a scale. I have to click on the window to see what the size is. It's not actually showing it to me there. So then I have to kind of go in through some more windows and say, okay, it's 111. I guess it is showing it to me there. It's just you might not know that the scale is a default 1. So it makes objects that just start at 111. I can hit delete on my keyboard to get rid of an object. And then if I wanted, I go to this Poly Primitives Create. And just to show you, if I make an object here, and I make another one back here, I'll draw them so they look like they're the same size. That looks about right. And then when I zoom out, you'll see that they're very noticeably different sizes. This one's bigger, this one's smaller, but since it's further away, I actually had to make it look bigger to make it look like it's the same size because of depth of field. As you know, things that are further away will appear smaller if they're the same size. So I normally try to draw in these top, front, and side, depending on how much I want the objects to align. And I can click on them. And I have a tool set here. I have Select, Move, Rotate, and Scale. And these will actually move these objects. So if I wanted to move this sphere, if I wanted to say, okay, I want this sphere to look a little more like it, I can click this Move tool. And I have these highlighted areas and these arrows. It will only move on the arrow that's highlighted yellow. And if I go in between an area, like this is the area between my X and my Z, so I can grab it and I can move it, and I can notice, oh, look, it actually is a little bigger now that I've overlapped them. And notice it lets me overlap. In the physical world, everything's a solid surface, whereas these just kind of appear solid, but they actually aren't. so we can cause things to overlap. I have my rotate, and that's going to rotate the object. And then I have scale, and scale scales it up and down. And I can scale it on one object. I always do my own sound effects, just a warning. And I can scale it on another. And if I go in the middle, I can scale it on all three. And this is pretty common for everything. Same here. If I wanted to rotate it, I can click one, or I can go on the outside and click more. So those actually manipulate the object. You can also manipulate the views. So if you've noticed, I've zoomed in and out a couple times, and I didn't tell you how I did that. If I want this kind of rough, jumpy zoom, it's my middle mouse button. Scrolling up on the mouse wheel, zooms in, scrolling down, zooms out. I can get a smoother scroll by using the Alt button on my computer. If I hit Alt, and then I click my right click, I can zoom in and out there. So I have to hold Alt and then drag up and down, holding my right click button down. I can also hit Alt and hit my middle mouse button, and that turns into moving the view. Once again, I'm not modifying the shape, I'm just moving the view. Same here. You'll notice I get this little move tool, and I can move them up and down and look around the view without actually changing my objects. Now, I can also rotate with my left button, and you'll notice I get an error message. Orthographic views cannot be rotated. I can only rotate. I can only kind of rotate and look around on perspective views. Just be careful when you're doing that. I have so many students that go, ooh, and then all of a sudden, so I actually didn't do it. Let's break it. There we go. All of a sudden, they flipped it so it's upside down, so they think they're clicking the closest object, but they're really clicking the one that's furthest away. And that is how you make shapes and navigate the window. Now, if you are a shortcut key person, the nice thing, and this is pretty standard for all 3D programs, is if I want to hit select, I can hit Q on my keyboard, and then I just go across that line. So Q is select, W is move, E is rotate, and R is scale. And this is always when students ask me, well, shouldn't it be the other way around? Like, shouldn't R be rotate? They're not specific to the name, they're just in order in that top part of the keyboard. So go ahead and try to navigate in Maya. You can make some shapes, turn on the different settings, and just get a feel for the interface.